Stay up to date on the latest political news this election season for less. Visit inforum.news/port and get 3 months of unlimited access to our news network for only 99 cents a month. Subscribe now at inforum.news/port. Welcome to Plain Talk, and we are in the heart of campaign season. It's late October. Boy, we're voting in a couple of weeks. And hey, as of this morning, 50,000 of you have already cast your votes, whether it's by absentee voting or early voting or vote by mail. So that's happening already. But a lot of you haven't cast your votes yet. And so here we are. We're going to have a debate in North Dakota's U.S. Senate race. Joining me is Incumbent Senator John Hoeven. He is running for another term, of course, in the United States Senate. His challengers are Democratic-NPL candidate Katrina Christiansen, who is also a professor at the University of Jamestown. Also joining me is independent candidate Rick Becker, who is a plastic surgeon based in Bismarck and also was a longtime member, or I guess 10 years of the State House of Representatives. And, of course, helping me with moderation duties and co-hosting is Chad Oban. And candidates, first of all, welcome. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you coming on. And these debates fly by, so I'm going to jump right into the first question. And to me, I think one of the most important things is, and the answer I think is the question is going to be a little bit different for the challengers. But Senator Hoeven, at times as a voter, as an observer, it could seem like Congress is dysfunctional. It is very, very partisan, very, very divided. How can you, if elected to another term, help address that situation?
Well, Rob, thanks to you and Chad for sponsoring the debate. And, you're right. It is. It's very partisan right now, and we need to find ways to work to accomplish things for the citizens of this great nation. And that's one of the things that I've brought to the Senate since I've been there, and that is the ability to work with people, certainly on our side of the aisle, but also across the aisle. And I think that comes, Rob, from my time as governor. As governor, I had to work with everybody to get an outcome. And obviously we did that in North Dakota. And you have to be able to find ways to do that as well in the Congress. Now, again, I bring my approach, which obviously is Republican and conservative, and I advocate for those things. I put it in the context of North Dakota common sense leadership. I think I bring North Dakota common sense leadership to Washington, D.C. But if you look at the things that I really focus on, the things that are most important to North Dakota, our biggest industry is agriculture. Energy is right behind it. We're a powerhouse in ag, a powerhouse in energy. And if you look, you'll see whether it's the Farm Bill, whether it's working to advance, our coal-fired electric industry, I have been able to be very effective in moving legislation that's not only vitally important for our state, but vitally important for our country. We need to be not just energy independent, energy secure, but energy dominant. And, our state's an energy powerhouse for this nation. And same thing in agriculture. We feed and fuel this nation and even beyond. And so I think that's the approach you have to take to get things done for the people of North Dakota and the people of this country.
Katrina, same question to you. How do you go to Washington and address whatever you want to call it, the gridlock, the divide, the rancor? How do we ease some of that in Congress?
So I think that we talked about this in March when I was on your show for the first time, Rob. I think that the institutional inertia of Congress is essentially so huge that they can't accomplish anything. And they've essentially allowed the courts to take over a lot of their roles as legislators. And they've allowed the executive branch to effectively function without constraint. And it's an advantage for both parties when they have an executive that's of their same party. And so I think that what we really need to do is look at removing the bloatedness of Congress and really try to make it efficient and streamlined so that it's actually working for the people of the United States of America, and in this instance, for the people of North Dakota. For example, John Hoeven voted against the American Rescue Package back in 2021. But where was he last week? He was at Grand Farms celebrating the investment from the COVID money that was put toward that. Same with Governor Burgum. He was there celebrating the federal funds that have been put toward the farm. The reality is that we have GOP talking points about government overspending and government reach, but they are there when the handouts are coming out and they're the first in line to take them. So we need to get rid of the elected officials that are just there to enrich themselves and find economic opportunities for their friends, and put in problem solvers like myself. I'm an engineer with 15 years of industry experience in the agriculture and energy sectors. I solve problems. I don't function out of spite, which is what I think a lot of partisans do. I want to see our objectives met efficiently. And that is the thing that I think stands out for me in this race, is I'm a problem solver. I'm not a stale politician that keeps repeating the same things they've been saying for decades. I am somebody who has developed new technologies. And those are my proudest things in my record, are when somebody said, oh, that can't be done. And in my 9 months, I could do it. So that is what I want the people of North Dakota to know, that I am somebody who's tenacious, and I am interested in solving their policies and not letting weak policy lead to market exploitation, whether it's the oil companies, whether it's big ag, or the pharmaceutical companies.
We're going to go, same question to you, Rick. How do you go to Washington, D.C. and get things done?
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't find that the gridlock we're seeing right now is a bad thing. What you have is Biden with his woke Marxist agenda really taking America in the wrong direction. So there, in so many regards of that agenda, there's no place for compromise. We have to fight against it. We have to stand strong and firmly against it. Absolutely, there's time for working with the other side. I've shown I can do that. I worked with Democrats to get confidential informant reform done, also civil asset forfeiture reform. I will work with anyone so long as they want to further the principles of freedom. Absolutely. So this idea that gridlock is a bad thing and compromise is inherently a good thing is completely incorrect. We have evidence. John Hoeven's happy to work with Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden. That's not helping America. What we need is someone to fight against them, not support them, not to vote for spending bills that blast through budget caps, that raise the debt ceiling, not vote for budgets that include no funding for a border wall, but yet does include funding for Planned Parenthood, like John Hoeven voted on more than one occasion. That kind of quote unquote compromise is not what North Dakotans are looking for. They're looking to send someone there to fight day in, day out for what North Dakotans believe in. And playing footsie with the Biden agenda, like John Hoeven does, is not the right answer. There may have been a time for John Hoeven's brand of politics. He's been there. He's been in politics, elected office since the days of Bill Clinton. It's too long. It's time for change. It's time to end the status quo.
Senator Hoeven, before I move on to my next question, both Dr. Becker and Dr. Christiansen talked about your record. Excuse me. Would you like to respond to that?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely appreciate that. First, in regard to Katrina and the American Rescue Plan, that's a great example that directly contradicts what Rick Becker just said. I voted against the American Rescue Plan because it was $1.9 trillion put forward by the Democrats. I absolutely voted against it. So I'm doing exactly what Rick Becker says. The difference is he won't work with anybody, and he has a clear record of sitting in the House and voting no on everything. And here's a guy who doesn't style himself after our founding fathers or Washington, our first president. He styles himself after some French philosopher from the 16th century or something like that. Nobody even knows what it is, other than the fact that he sits in the House and votes no on everything and says he's accomplishing everything, or a lot of things. The civil asset forfeiture bill he talks about, actually he voted against his own bill, and it was somebody else's bill that passed, and he takes credit for it. What he does is vote no, but he kind of makes the point that rebuts just what Katrina said. I voted no on the American Rescue Plan. I've consistently and effectively opposed the Biden agenda. And that means you have to figure out how to do it. You actually have to legislate. And as far as the rescue plan and taking credit, Katrina at Grand Farm, I've done a ton for Grand Farm. You bet I was there, because I brought Sonny Perdue out as the Ag Secretary to kick it off a number of years ago. I've worked to get a cooperative agreement in place between the NDSU, Grand Farm, and the Ag Research Service, which is NDSU, that provides funding and a working relationship. So I've done a ton for Grand Farm. It wasn't about the American Rescue Plan, which I did vote against because it creates more inflation. And Rick, you talk about a border wall. I've fought for funding for a border wall. I fought to get funding for it. Let's check your record. Oh, when the North Dakota legislature had a resolution in support of the border wall, how did you vote, Rick? You want to tell everybody? You voted no. I voted and worked to get funding for the border wall, and will continue to. I just got back from the border. I was just down in El Paso. I've been to the Del Rio sector. I've been to the Rio Grande sector. I'm fighting for a border wall. You're voting against it. You're Mr. Say one thing and do another. And as far as Planned Parenthood, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's talk about that a little bit. I have always supported the Hyde Amendment, which says no funding for abortion. Any legislation, I've always said the Hyde Amendment has to be there so that there's no funding for abortion. In addition, I am sponsoring legislation and have sponsored legislation to defund Planned Parenthood. I'm fighting against it. I'm fighting against these things. Now let's check your record. Should we check your record on the whole abortion issue? 7 times. 7 times you voted for abortion. 7 times. Now let's check that out. Let's see, you voted for abortion.
How long are we going to let this go on?
Well, I'm going to give you a chance to respond. John, let's wrap it up, and we'll give Katrina and Rick a chance.
You voted for abortion after a baby was pain capable. You voted for abortion after a fetal heartbeat. You voted for abortion for gender selection. You voted for abortion 7 times. You said, well, you just weren't too sure. You're a medical doctor. You came to the legislature as a medical doctor. You say one thing, you do another.
All right,
Dr. Christiansen, do you want to talk a little bit about your opinion on abortion?
Yes. I think that it's really important that we understand that abortion care is health care. I think that the people on this call can sometimes be intellectually dishonest when they talk about the positions that women are in when they have to have abortion care. And they are vilifying people who are in desperate, grievous moments, making the toughest decisions really imaginable. And I think it's really important that we put taking care of North Dakotans, including pregnant women, as the most important thing, rather than scoring cheap political points. That's what this conversation better not be about, scoring cheap political points, because the reality is that nobody wants to have an abortion. And sometimes people are put into really difficult positions, and they should be able to, with the discussion with their partner and their doctor, make that decision. It is reprehensible that the government is mandating health care for women.
Dr. Christiansen, just to follow up there. So what would you do?
I'd like to,
the Senate?
just before you go on to the next question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to stay on the same subject, but go ahead, Dr. Becker, and then we'll go back.
John Hoeven went on a tirade which was filled with misrepresentations and lies, and so I will respond to that. First off, I guess I'm not going to take the time to defend my record. I have accomplished a tremendous amount, and we can go through that list if you'd like. He talks about this abortion thing, and yes, in 2013, I readily admit I was split. He's incorrect again on his information about 7 votes, but yes, I voted against pro-life bills. I voted against the 6-week bill, but I did vote for the 20-week bill. I rethought things about the proper role of what I should be doing, and ever since 2013, so 10 years, I have been voting pro-life. I have a 100% record with North Dakota Right to Life. But here's the thing I want to get to. Here's typical politician status quo. John Hoeven, he tells you, I vote for the Hyde Amendment. I vote for the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment says no funds can go directly to abortion. But what he does do in 2015 and 2018, he votes for funding, federal funding to Planned Parenthood. The Hyde Amendment says, hey, you know what? We're not going to pay for the actual abortion procedure. But John Hoeven says, let's send the money to Planned Parenthood, and it'll pay for the construction, the parking lot, the receptionist, the record keeping, it'll pay for everything, but not technically for that procedure. So you don't get out of it by using that kind of political mumbo jumbo. North Dakotans are too smart for that.
So I want to go back to Dr. Christiansen really quick. If elected to the Senate, what would you do? Would you work to codify Roe, or what exactly would be your plan?
Yes, the Dobbs decision has allowed government interference in people's health care. And really, since the decision, we've seen that there are far-reaching and terrible consequences of government overriding healthcare decisions between a doctor and a patient. We see women having to suffer sepsis. We see women having to experience dangerous blood loss due to ectopic pregnancies. We see denial of prescriptions. We've seen children be denied care in their home state, even though they're carrying a rapist's baby. And if you didn't believe it before, you should believe it now. That decision has actually put the lives of women and children in jeopardy. And the one thing that we should all agree on this call with Rick and Senator Hoeven is that government should not be mandating difficult medical decisions. Doctors should not have to hesitate to make life-saving calls. And it is reprehensible that anybody thinks that government belongs in a doctor's office.
Let's just get everybody on the record, since we've entered the abortion discussion. Dr. Christiansen, if you were going to write a law codifying abortion in some way, what would it be? Would it be like a 15-week ban? Would it be? I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to put words in your mouth, but what would an abortion law look like in your mind that you would vote for in the Senate?
Rob, I'm not sure that's true. I think given the opportunity, you would put words in my mouth. I think you did that before on Twitter.
Okay. Well, I'm asking a question.
I would codify Roe.
Okay.
I think it's important that the AMA, the American Medical Association, is the guiding light in what healthcare should be. And I think that there are people who like to vilify women who have to receive life-saving care later on in pregnancies. And those are the most horrendous decisions anyone would have to go through. And so it's important that the AMA be the guiding light in that.
Rick, Representative Dr. Becker, I should say, what would your, if you were going to vote for a bill in the Senate, or I guess write a bill in the United States Senate codifying abortion, what would it look like?
Well, we have to start from the point in which we say life begins at conception. So if I were to codify something along the lines of, say, Title 18, which makes murder illegal federally, it would be simply that. It wouldn't be a 15-week or 12-week or 20-week. It would just be at 0 week.
Senator Hoeven, same question to you.
You know, I've always voted pro-life. I support life. And so I would, obviously have a bill that's along the lines of the bill that we have in North Dakota, where we make sure that we support life however and whenever we can. And like I say, whether it's been at the state level or the federal level, I've always voted for life and will continue to.
I want to chime in here because Senator Hoeven is saying that he will always vote for life, but he voted against capping insulin prices for private insurance and for Medicare recipients. And that the weak policy that Congress has had on the market exploitation of insulin price gouging is reprehensible. The most commonly used form of insulin costs 10 times more in the United States than any developed country. And the last 20 years, we've seen 1,000 price increase. People need insulin to live. So I disagree with that posturing by Senator Hoeven that he's always been for life, only when it's convenient for political points.
Senator Hoeven, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, first off, I voted for an amendment offered by John Kennedy that would have helped reduce the price of insulin, and that was blocked by the Democrats, Katrina. You may want to check into that. And the other thing I'd bring up for you is you're pro-abortion. Does that mean right up to the point of birth? Maybe you could answer that for us.
I think I've already clarified that. Again, your position is to exploit and vilify people that see the life-saving care of abortion care as a talking point for political points. The bill that you're talking about, if it was for capping insulin prices at $50, wasn't as good as the Democrats' bill that capped it at $35. Do better, John.
So I'm gonna move us off of abortion.
I didn't hear your answer on abortion, Katrina. All I heard was another attack. And in fact, the amendment I voted for would have helped with insulin costs.
I'm going to move us off of abortion. Dr. Becker, you've been very critical of Senator Hoeven's vote in favor of the infrastructure bill. Can you talk about why you were so opposed to that? And then Senator Hoeven, why you supported it? And then Katrina, what would you have done on the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed Congress? Dr. Becker, you first.
Well, yeah, I think the Biden fake green infrastructure deal that John Hoeven voted for is a wonderful example of this false sense of why compromise is always good. Hoeven handed Biden his biggest victory of his presidency by voting for this bill, by crossing over with 18 other Republicans, 15 of which, including John Hoeven, have an F rating with Heritage Action for Liberty. And the reason is because we are a nation in debt, severely in debt. And $1.2 trillion, that's $1 million times a million. It's a crazy amount. We don't have that much money. As Kelly Armstrong, Congressman Armstrong said on this program, that bill contributed to inflation and was bad for North Dakota. There's no question about it. It had 10% of its funding was actual infrastructure. These status quo politicians are playing word games again and again. The real money here was for green energy. There was green energy everywhere, and the primary reason John voted for it is because it was chock full of corporate welfare. There is billions and billions of dollars going to private company after private company. And that's not what the taxpayers are looking for. They're looking for relief from this inflation that John Hoeven's spending voting record has dramatically contributed to. They're looking for a turnaround in our economy. So that, yeah, absolutely. And then John will say, oh, it was only $550 billion. Well, that's because, again, typical politicians are pretending that the money that comes from another place that hasn't been spent has already been spent, and so we don't count it. It's all this gamesmanship that people are sick of. We're looking for a change. We're looking for someone to fight to do the right thing. We're looking for someone who's not going to continue to spend us and our children and our grandchildren into debt that cannot be repaid.
Senator Hoeven?
Yeah, well, Rick, there you go again. I mean, you just can't get it right. I don't know if you don't know or you just can't make your case on the facts. I mean, I just don't know how you can be so wrong on simple facts. I mean, let's start with the amount of the bill. Rick, was the bill 1.2 trillion or was it 950 billion? Because you keep saying 1.2 trillion, and that's a Democrat proposal that was defeated. So you can't even get the amount of the bill right. I mean, for starters, it was 950 billion, not 1.2 trillion. Now let's go through. That seems like a big thing. So I don't know if you don't know or you just like to make things up. But now let's go through the 950 billion. Oh, and just a minute, as far as Kelly's vote, now Kevin and I voted for infrastructure in the Senate in order to kill the Build Back Better bill. In the House, those two were combined. And had it been combined in the Senate, we would have voted like it was in the House. Then we would have voted the same way Kelly did. So that, yeah, we agree with Kelly's vote in the House, but it was different in the House and the Senate. And remember, the House passed Build Back Better, $5 trillion. If we hadn't killed it in the Senate, there'd be another $5 trillion of spending. Guy like you would have voted no because that's the easier vote. Kevin and I worked to kill Build Back Better. And then now, but let's go back to the simple facts that you always like to either misrepresent or just don't know. It wasn't 1.2 trillion. It was 950 billion. That's the basic highway bill, which is 400 billion. We passed that every 5 years. Then it was 550 billion on top of that. Now you say, oh, well, only 100 billion, 120 to 130 billion was infrastructure. Wrong. There was over 400 billion in there just for roads and bridges. So of the 950, over 400 billion is roads and bridges. Then if you add in rail, power infrastructure, broadband, water projects, resiliency projects, airports, seaports. That's another $400 billion. That's hard infrastructure. You're already
okay,
over
John.
$800 billion.
Your answers are quite lengthy and take up
let me-
most of this podcast. So
yeah,
what
of
I'd
course.
like to do is
Yeah, you
respond
have
that
to
if your
interrupt.
response
Hold on,
is
John,
the
hold on.
big
Rick, hold
my-
on.
Let me just wrap.
Let John finish, and then Rick, you can respond.
Yeah. Then he
Go ahead.
can go on with some more.
Go ahead, John.
I guess inaccurate
Just,
facts.
guys, come on.
I just cited over $800 billion in hard infrastructure. So then, if you want to argue about the rest that you think some other stream do, fine. Of course, we weren't going to get everything we want, but the point is, we got important infrastructure. We got $600 million more for North Dakota roads and bridges. We got funding for flood protection in Fargo, and we killed Build Back Better. $500 trillion in spending. You wouldn't have done that. It would have passed had you been there.
You're darn right I wouldn't have done it, because the way you present it is completely incorrect. And you're right. I should have said 1 trillion, not 1.2 trillion. You guys go through money like it grows on trees. But what we're looking at is of new road and bridge spending, it's about 120 to 130 million. The things you count like broadband infrastructure is a joke, because what it includes is subsidizing American households $30 a month to get broadband. This aspect is complete nonsensical, and you keep pointing out as though I'm misrepresenting, because instead of 1.2 trillion, it was 1 trillion. I mean, good for you. When you bring up this idea that you saved the taxpayers $5 trillion, that is a joke, sir, and you know it, because Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin would never have voted for that. What would have happened is a severely watered down bill. And do you know what happened after you voted and crossed over with those other 18? That watered down bill did in fact pass. And if it was a good idea, why were there only 19 big spending Republicans that crossed over? Why didn't the conservatives cross over?
I want to give.
I'd like to get Dr. Christiansen in here if we can.
Yeah, if John and Rick want to spend the hour arguing, that's fine. I'm here to talk about the issues that actually matter. And so I don't think that the infrastructure bill was necessarily a bad bill. I think that, our senators could have done a better job advocating for improving rail, in particular in North Dakota, because we have such a low ratio of production to processing capacity. Our farmers depend on a very effective rail system. And so we saw just how badly our supply chain can be impacted by external things. And so I think it's really important that we continue to make infrastructure investments that make our supply chain robust and make margins big for our producers in the state of North Dakota. And that means making sure that our roads and bridges and rail can operate without interruption. Markets do not like interruption. They don't like arguments like we're having right now. They want to make sure that goods will flow, and they will flow on time, and they will make people money. And so I think based on the things that we saw with supply chain during the pandemic, these infrastructure projects they're actually too small. We should have gone bigger. That's what I think. Go big or go home.
I want to move us on to farm policy now, and I'll start with you, Dr. Becker. There's been a group out there that's been doing some advertising, and they've been criticizing you on farm policy. Some of the things they've been saying is that you're against the crop insurance program. I think there's even been claims I've seen out there that you're anti-farmer. Can you address, what is your position on crop insurance? What is your position on agriculture? And what's your response to the contention that you're anti-farmer?
Well, it's a typical leftist attack that's coming from John Hoeven. And yes, I know this is coming from a PAC. However, they are mimicking exactly what John Hoeven was saying earlier in the year. So this stems, I'll try to be brief. This stems from an interview I did with Joel Heitkamp. And so what John has done is he's taken a statement out of context and using that to manipulate farmers. I think it's very unfortunate and frankly an embarrassment that you're going to manipulate farmers with a campaign of fear mongering. What I said was in the context of what's constitutional, the federal government has nowhere in the Constitution does it say the federal government can provide insurance, whether flood, whether farm, it doesn't matter. That's a more of a philosophical or concept kind of discussion. In that same interview, I clarified when someone asked the question, absolutely not. I'm not talking about ending crop insurance. I don't have an interest in that. That would be like saying I want people to not have car insurance. What I have said is I would love to look at options, that's a keyword, options that farmers could use private insurance, for example, like they do with hail, or maybe state supplied or a group of state supplied. Some people say, well, that's not going to work. Okay, well, let's take a look at it. We don't know if we don't try. And I'm also advocating for reforms to decrease abuse and to increase efficiency. Every single federal program out there needs some help with those two things. We know that there is no federal program that shouldn't be reformed. And by doing those two things, what happens is we lower the premiums for farmers. So I am very pro-farmer. I will also say North Dakota Farm Bureau has, as part of its policies it advocates for, is a private option. So John Hoeven took this opportunity to say, you know what, I can distort what he said, and I will say specifically, which is incorrect, that Becker said he will vote to end crop insurance. I've never said such a thing.
John?
Well, I guess the best way to answer that is just go back and look it up yourself. He said point blank that he's against federal crop insurance and he's against federal flood insurance. He said both. I mean, as clearly as he could, he said he's against it. Then he got called on it, and now he's turning himself into a pretzel, trying to say, well, he's kind of for it, I think. But it's hard to say because on any given day, he kind of changes his mind. I mean, when he says, well, it should be like car insurance or home insurance, those aren't federal programs. That's privatized. So then he's effectively going back to saying he wants it privatized. Then he comes back and says it's an option. But then he just got done telling you that he thinks it's unconstitutional. And so, you know, it's one of these deals where he said point blank he's against it. He got called on it. And so, of course, he's changing his position and he's tying himself into a knot. But that's not surprising. He does that over and over again. I mean, he stands in front of the Republican convention and he tells everybody he's going to honor and respect the will of the convention. And then he runs anyway. And he gives us this ridiculous argument that because somehow he didn't run in the primary, he's honoring what he stood and told 2,000 people that he would honor their wishes. And to do it, he has to even leave the party. Now he's an independent, but he can't. But again,
we can discuss that. But I want to stick this on farm policy. So if you want to wrap up,
but the final point is, I mean, he comes out and he also says he doesn't know jack about agriculture, our number one industry. He's been in the legislature for 10 years, and he says he doesn't know or care.
Hold on.
It's just this crazy shotgun approach. Let's hear from Katrina, because you're just going everywhere, and what you're saying has no substance behind it.
Katrina,
but Rick, it's your own words. Rick, it's your own words.
Exactly,
okay.
It is my own words. I clarified
Gentlemen,
already. You're struggling.
Gentlemen, I want
you're
Katrina.
Struggling, man.
I want Katrina to weigh in on this as well. Katrina, farm policy, crop insurance. What are your feelings?
I think crop insurance is the backstop for our producers to make sure that our food supply chain is strong and robust for a growing population. The way that the Farm Bill is set up right now, they're not set up as crop subsidies. And the future bill won't have crop subsidies, but there will be crop insurance, which is really important. If you look at the last 3 years of weather and how it negatively impacted North Dakota growers, it's really important to have that available, mostly because they're competing in a market that's not fair. Whether it's tariffs that lead to trade wars, whether we have senators who aren't willing to do the work on making sure that we have country of origin labeling for our ranchers and making sure that the tax credits in our market are beneficial and not punitive for our farmers is really important. During John's 4 years, during the Trump years, he supported Trump's trade war that led to $9.2 billion in losses for North Dakota growers. And in response to that, and I bet Rick will jump on this, the federal government had to give $16 billion in aid to growers affected by the trade war. The reality is our farmers rely on trade and access to new markets. That's where the growth is. I think the thing that stands out between me and John and Rick is that I actually have industry experience in the agricultural sector. We don't like disruptions. We need access to new markets, whether that's via rail or trucks that have to go over bridges. We do not want trade wars because we want to be where the markets are growing. And so that's what our farm bill should do. Where can we make farmers winners? Always.
Moving to the topic of energy, Dr. Christiansen, often Democrats are seen as being anti-fossil fuel. And some are, I suppose. Where are you at in terms of energy production in North Dakota, balancing between climate change and the fact that there's a lot of good jobs in fossil fuel here in North Dakota? What's your approach to energy development?
So I think that one of the things that we really need to be aware of is that there are these things called disruptive technologies that disrupt the marketplace. And so if you look at battery technology development, North Dakota needs to be prepared, whether it's in the next 5 years or the next 10 years, that there will be a disruptive technology that could displace oil production. Now, what I want to point out is that we have an opportunity through the federal government to take advantage of batteries that have been developed by the Department of Energy through research and development. We could have complex battery manufacturing in the United States. In fact, we should, because we know that not having that sort of production in the United States cripples our supply chain. It cripples our economy to not be competitive. The biggest concern that we all should have is competition with China. And to be competitive with China, we need to be developing new technologies and manufacturing those new technologies here. I do not think we should be afraid of new development. Regarding fossil fuels, right now, North Dakota is producing, I think, way more than when Hoeven left office. I believe it's about 3 times more daily oil production than when Hoeven left office. The idea that we're, somehow going to fall off of an oil cliff is preposterous. People are making money right now, and they're not going to stop making money until there's a better technology. And we should be positioned for that moment.
Senator Hoeven, what's your thoughts on energy production and the future of energy?
Well, both as governor and as senator, I've worked to help make North Dakota an energy powerhouse. I work with industry to make sure that we're producing more energy from all sources. When I was governor, I worked with industry. We cracked the code on the block, and we went from and Katrina's just way off here. I'm not sure what she's talking about. I mean, when I started,
think you need to not say things like that, John, because I actually do know what I'm talking about. I have a PhD in engineering, and I've worked in the energy market, and I'm not going to take your dismissive language.
Okay. When I started as governor, we were producing less than 100,000 barrels a day going down. We worked with industry. We did a ton of things, cracked the code, and went to ultimately over 1.5 million barrels. The Empower North Dakota energy plan I put in place back then is still the energy plan the state has, and I continue that work in the Senate. And most recently, what I'm working on is cracking the code on carbon capture. We have the most advanced coal-fired electric industry in the nation. We've solved SOx, which is sulfur dioxide. We've solved NOx, which is nitrous oxide. We've solved mercury, and now we're going to be able to capture CO2. And as a result of that, we're going to keep our coal-fired electric industry, those coal miners, our power plants, long into the future for many generations, and provide 24/7 baseload power to the grid for our nation, because I'm working with them to make sure that we address these things that we have to, because the nation is requiring us to do it. And that's why I worked so hard on things like Project Tundra, on loan guarantees for the industry, and on 45Q to make these new technologies commercially viable for our industry. They're technologically viable, but they got to be commercially viable. Now you see DGC going ahead with it. Coal Creek's going to go ahead with it. The Young Plant's going to go ahead with it. That's how you build an energy future, by working with our industry to do it. And that's why North Dakota is an energy powerhouse and will continue to be an energy powerhouse long into the future.
Dr. Becker, same question to you about energy development. And I know you've expressed some concerns about eminent domain and how that's being used in the state, if you want to elaborate on that as well.
You bet. The biggest thing with our energy policies, we have to really fight against the fossil fuel killing Biden agenda. And we can't play nice with that. It must be stopped. Where Biden has taken us is a place we should never be. $5 diesel, the gas prices soaring, our strategic reserves depleted, sending those reserves to China. I mean, on and on and on and on. We have to stand firm against Biden's agenda. Now, the way to do that is not the way our current incumbent, John Hoeven, does it. Now, John has been, this is his standard, which is when he talks about cracking the code and helping this, helping that, politicians don't actually crack the code. What they do is they figure out ways to involve corporate welfare, to involve subsidies, taking taxpayer dollars and giving them to private companies. So what we've seen from the get-go with Senator Hoeven is a support of ethanol subsidies to a tremendous degree, and then a support of wind energy subsidies and tax credits and the extension of those tax credits. And those competitors to coal have finally hurt coal so bad, coal's on the ropes. So now the answer is, hey, I got a good idea. Let's do more taxpayer subsidies to prop up coal because now I've damaged it so much. Then he's got the cracking the code with 45Q, which again is just a scheme that he takes from Al Gore with carbon credits. I don't know why we are going to play within that game. Instead of fighting back against the concept of environmental extremism and carbon credits, we're going to figure out how to enrich certain companies. 45Q is paying companies, private companies, to take carbon dioxide and shove it underground. And people say, well, hey, that's good. We need that so we can produce more oil. No, you only need it if you buy in to the Al Gore concept of carbon tax credits. So then what we have then is the ethanol plants down in Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, South Dakota, pumping up their carbon dioxide and taking it up into central North Dakota and putting it underground. Now, let's not be confused with enhanced oil recovery. I'm all in favor of enhanced oil recovery. You can take carbon dioxide and use it, shove it down some oil wells and get more oil out. That's smart. But John Hoeven's 45Q tax credit scheme does exactly the opposite. It pays people 42% more money instead of putting it down for enhanced oil recovery to just shove it underground. It makes absolutely no sense. As far as the eminent domain component of your question, Summit Carbon Solutions is the company, the tremendously subsidized company that believes very strongly in ESG, which is ruining this country. And I would love to see our representatives and senators in Congress fight more against this. But what they are is laying down a 24-inch pipeline across North Dakota, and they are not being respectful of farmers, ranchers, and landowners. And they're looking at eminent domain. They're saying they're not, but they are. Eminent domain, of course, is getting government to force a landowner to allow a pipeline to be placed. Now, carbon dioxide is a private enterprise. It's a waste product from private companies, and it's then a profit maker for other companies. We never should be using eminent domain when it comes to private industry. And so that's why I had a bill drafted, which another legislator is going to be submitting in this next legislative session.
So I would just like the opportunity to talk about the carbon dioxide capture, if that's all right with everybody. I think Rick made some really good points. The reality is that most of the carbon dioxide capture is used for enhanced oil recovery. So the idea that you, Senator Hoeven, are selling this as a climate change solution is bananas. Only a small portion of carbon capture projects, maybe somewhere between 10 or 15%, actually store carbon dioxide in structures. The reality is carbon dioxide is a pollutant. It doesn't make anybody any money. The market is going to probably lead to this, Summit pipeline actually, well, hopefully it never goes into the ground because you've got carbon dioxide at 2,500 PSI, and it will, if it's leaked, have a 3-mile radius where carbon dioxide, being heavier than air, will displace all of the oxygen. Your car will not be able to run in that case. Your ambulances will not be able to run in that case. You will asphyxiate if there is carbon dioxide displacing air. But the reality is that close to 90% of the proposed carbon dioxide capture equipment or pipelines or any of those fail at the implementation stage because they're expensive to operate. Nobody wants to spend money on a pollutant.
Senator Hoeven,
that's the engineering reality.
Okay, Senator Hoeven, we'll let you respond to that, and then I want to move us on to a new topic.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, the difference certainly between myself and in this case, Rick, and maybe Katrina too, is that I am fighting back. I am fighting the Biden energy agenda tooth and nail. Time and again, I've talked about how he's put the handcuffs on our energy producers, and I am fighting Biden's energy agenda tooth and nail. But Rick's trying to conflate that with, I'm not giving up. I'm going to do everything I can to keep our coal-fired electric industry in business. So I'm a realist. I'm doing the things that we need to do to make sure that those coal miners have a job for generation, to make sure those plants are in business for generations. I'm willing to do it. He just gives up. He goes in his corner. He votes no, and he demagogues the issue. But make no mistake, I'm fighting the Biden agenda, but I'm going to keep our industry going, and I'm taking the steps to do that. And that's not just important for our state, for those communities that depend on that energy industry, for those workers. But it's important for our grid. It's important for our nation that we have this coal-fired electric 24-hour baseload for generations to come. And unlike Rick, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to do what it takes to get it done for our state and our country and our energy future.
I'm not sure where you get the idea about giving up. There's no giving up here. I'm saying quite the opposite. Instead of just accepting what Biden is handing down with the ESG, that you feel like the only way we can produce more oil is if we play the game of believing in carbon credits. I'm actually wanting to fight against it from the get-go, the whole concept, so we can be maximally producing oil without playing the carbon credit scheme game.
Rick, you got to deal with Rick. You got to deal with reality at some point. I don't know.
You got to fight for what's right, John.
I don't know.
That's what I'll say. There's a difference between being a realist and actually fighting for the right thing.
I just got done saying I am fighting his agenda tooth and nail, but I'm going to keep our guys in the game. You're not. They're going to be out of business with your approach.
All right.
Their game is going to end. They're going to move the goalposts, John. When you play with these guys, you get burned.
Okay, we're gonna move on. I think you both made your points. I want to talk about foreign policy for a moment and Ukraine. Obviously, we all know Russia invaded Ukraine. The United States government, along with many of our allies and NATO, have been supporting the Ukrainian government in their fight against Russia. Although we've heard some leaders, including Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy in the United States House of Representatives, who, if Republicans are successful in the midterms, may be Speaker of the House. He has said that Ukraine may have a hard time finding ongoing financial support from a Republican majority. So, Senator Hoeven, I want to start with you. What are your feelings about ongoing support for Ukraine? Do you support it?
Well, we do need to support Ukraine because they are fighting back against Russian aggression. And this isn't just about Ukraine. This isn't just about an autocrat, Putin, going in and killing people indiscriminately and trying to take territory. This is about the security of not only Europe, but our security here at home. We have to stand up against Russia. We have to stand up against China for freedom-loving people in the world. And here you have Ukrainians fighting and dying, taking on Russia. So, yes, we do need to help them. And, all you have to do is look back to World War II when, the world failed to stand up to a dictator. And you saw what happened. And we can't let somebody like Putin continue to wage war and not expect that doesn't put us at risk. It does. And so we do have to stand up to him and stop him. And I'm adamant that we have to stand up against Russia and stand up against China.
Dr. Christiansen, same question to you.
It's a funny answer. It sounds a lot like mine that I gave before. But the reality is John Hoeven voted against Ukrainian aid in March when they benefited from the United States government giving them funding to give them momentum against Russian aggression. The reality is that Ukraine and Ukrainians' democracy is really important, and Russia's threat to democracy in all of Europe is really a concern that we need to think about in these stupid fights about the budget. The reality is, for Republicans, the budget and the deficit only matters when there's a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress. We had $7.8 trillion worth of deficit increases during the Trump administration, the third largest in the last century, and non-wartime deficits was the greatest. So the reality that these two or the GOP are concerned about deficit is only a talking point during an election year. The reality is we want to avoid war. We also want to make sure that democracy is protected for our allies, and they have access to the energy and food supply chains that they need to have good lives. And so it's really important that we continue to support, even if it's just the $54 billion that might get Rick's underwear in a bunch here. It's 50 times less than the cost of the Afghanistan war. And we don't have to have anybody die if we continue to fund it the way that we've been doing it. So it's really important to continue to follow this policy of giving Ukraine momentum against Russian aggression.
Dr. Becker, same question to you.
Yeah, actually, I agree with Katrina. What we find is that the big spending Republicans, the rhinos, are very much about wringing their hands about the budget as long as a Democrat is in charge, and also if they're in the minority. And as soon as they get the power, then they're the turn the money faucets on big time. And that's why I say that I'm different. That's why I am an independent Republican. I would stand with the likes of Rand Paul and Mike Lee, and I would fight against this crazy spending that John consistently votes for. And I know that what we're looking at is Ukraine. I'll address that. So here's the thing: is we sent nearly $60 billion over to Ukraine. Now that may or may not be the correct thing to do morally. I'm very skeptical. But I was not given the information that the senators were given. I'm skeptical on whether I would send that over at all. Perhaps I would. But what the senators who voted for it do know is that Ukraine is rife with corruption. Zelensky may be a good guy. I don't know, frankly. But the government has corruption through and through. And we as a nation, severely in debt, battling inflation, people's savings being wiped out, say, hey, let's go ahead and send $60 billion over to Ukraine with no oversight and no accountability. What we're doing is lining corrupt politicians' pockets in the Ukraine. And as my understanding is, some of our money is going to fund their public pensions. And yet we can't even provide the proper pension in the United States. So that's what we're looking at. So there's a fear to say no to send it over because it might look bad at the time. And that's what we have to rise above. We have to always be considering America first, America first.
We're coming up on the. I'm sorry, Senator. If you want to respond to that, what I was going to say is we're coming up on the end of our time together. I really appreciate you all joining. I want to give you each a chance. A few minutes here at the end. We have about 6 minutes left. For each of you to just wrap up any final thoughts, any last things that you want to respond to. We'll start with Dr. Christiansen. We'll go to Senator Hoeven, and then to Dr. Becker. Dr. Christiansen, you first.
Yeah, so thank you, Rob. Thanks for having us. This was obviously invigorating for me. But our country faces a lot of big issues. Our energy future, ensuring that our elections are free and fair and fascists don't take over in D.C., that we have high quality education for our children, that we protect and strengthen Social Security, and that we make an effort to build strong, sustainable rural communities. In fact, the people of the United States and in North Dakota really deserve an economy that works for everybody, not just the rich people up at the top. One that's fair, one that has lots of good jobs, and that reward people with good wages and security in retirement, to Rick's point. We need to make sure that we set up a system that encourages competition and penalizes price gouging, which we didn't get to talk about here. But we can't get there using the same tools to solve problems. As much as I disagree with Rick on some of his positions, I always know where he's going to stand. But with Hoeven, he will jump around. He has no principles. His focus is finding political opportunity for himself and economic opportunity for his best friends. It's just go along and get along. So that's where the competition stands. And I am just asking that your listeners, when they go to the voting poll, if they already haven't voted, to visualize when they're voting, instead of having a party label after their name, visualize an occupation. John Hoeven, banker. Rick Becker, doctor. Katrina Christiansen, engineer. I'm a problem solver, and that's what I am going to do when I go to Washington, D.C. I am not motivated by money. I am motivated by doing the right thing.
Senator Hoeven?
Well, thanks, Rob. I think it is a clear choice. I mean, I think Katrina, is always attacking because, look, she's going to support Biden and the Biden agenda. I think people know that the Biden agenda is bad for North Dakota and it's bad for the country. In Rick's case, I think he just demonstrated on that last answer. You asked him about Ukraine. I couldn't tell you whether he's for it or against it. He was clearly on both sides of it. I mean, he says one thing, he does another. And I mean, now he's not a Republican. He's not an independent. He's an independent Republican. At one point, he said it didn't matter to him if he had a D behind his name, an R behind his name, or an I behind his name. I mean, he's good at making arguments, I guess, but where is he? He says one thing and does another. I've got a clear track record of working for North Dakota. My focus, my priority is what's good for North Dakota. Our number one industry is agriculture. I'm a leader. I'm the top Republican on ag approach, the second ranking Republican on ag. We're going to write a farm bill next year. That's incredibly important to North Dakota. That's incredibly important to our country. I'm going to be there making sure that it's good for our state. Or energy. We just got done talking about, yeah, sure. In a perfect world, I could dictate just how the country should decide they want to do energy. But the reality is we've got to take the kind of steps we're taking to make sure that we continue to be an energy powerhouse, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's coal or anything else. I do those things so that the people in those coal mines, in the power plants, in the communities, so they know that they've got a future. And I'm fighting for them every day. And at the same time, I fight back against the Biden agenda, but I fight to get results. I don't just sit there and say, oh, no to this, no to that, and then just let whatever happen. No, I fight to get results, and I fight the Biden agenda tooth and nail. I'll continue to do that, and I fight for the fundamentals. I mean, whether it's lower taxes, fighting for balanced budget amendment, less spending, less regulation, less red tape, supporting our small businesses, supporting law enforcement, our military, our veterans, so that people feel safer at home and abroad, securing the border, all these things. I fight for these things because they're good for North Dakota. They're good for our country. That's how we make our state safe and strong and our country safe and strong. I bring common sense, North Dakota common sense leadership to Washington, D.C., and it is an honor to serve the people. Mikey and I are so honored to serve the people of this great nation, and we'll continue to do everything we can for North Dakota and for our country.
Dr. Becker.
Yes, I find it really interesting, and I think it sheds light on exactly what we have at hand. When Katrina and I disagree, what she says about my position is accurate. And we can say to the voters, look, we have a difference of opinion on what's best for America and for North Dakota. When John Hoeven talks, it's who knows what, I don't even know what it means. It's distortions, if not outright fabrications and lies. It's rather than going honestly and forthrightly to the points of a policy position, it's all of this mumbo jumbo. There's no substance there. And I think that what he has maybe is Washington-itis. He's not accustomed to just being frank and authentic with the people of North Dakota. And that's why it's time for him to go. I represent an opportunity to bring into Washington, D.C., somebody that will fight for North Dakota. I don't believe that we should have a person that's going to support the Biden agenda. It's a dangerous and outright evil agenda. But I also don't believe we should send John Hoeven.
I don't know if we lost Dr. Becker there for a moment.
Currently in economically.
Hey, Rick, I don't mean to interrupt, but you blanked out there for a minute, so maybe you want to repeat maybe the last 15 seconds or so. I'm sorry.
All right. Well, I don't know how many seconds it was, but I'll just repeat. What I am suggesting, number one, Katrina is very, very straightforward. She and I can have a difference of opinion on policy. And what she says about my positions is not inaccurate. It's accurate. We can just disagree on what's best for North Dakota. That's in contradistinction to John Hoeven. When he comes out, I don't know what he's even saying about me. It doesn't make any sense. It's a distortions, it's fabrications, and it's meant to just kind of obfuscate what it is that we're talking about, because he doesn't have the substance. He doesn't have the foundation behind him. What I said is that I believe he has a case of Washingtonitis. He's a status quo politician that talks in a lot of fluff with very little stuff. And that's exactly why we need a change. We need to end the status quo. The situation is that the people that got us into the position we are at economically, with inflation, with everything going on, are the people like John Hoeven that are the big spenders that have been there for 10 to 15 years. It is insane to think that we can turn our country around by sending him back. We need a change. The people are looking for a change. They want someone authentic and genuine who will stand up and fight against the Biden agenda. And that person is me.
Well, we're going to end it there. I appreciate all three of you coming on. I think it was a very good discussion. I appreciate it, and good luck going forward. Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.